Imagine for a moment the moment when everything falls silent. The heart stops, the body no longer moves. To an outsider, it seems like the end. But what if it isn't? What if, at this very moment, something much bigger is beginning? This question spans centuries, religions, and even modern science. Children ask it, adults avoid it, but the truth is, no one goes through life without thinking about what comes after death. Father Pio said that death should not be seen as a frightening end, but as a door that opens to a reality we cannot see. Still, this idea provokes fear. After all, the unknown is always frightening. What happens when we close our eyes for the last time? Are we left in the dark? Do we sleep forever, or do we wake up somewhere else? What's most intriguing is that science has also begun to ask similar questions. Doctors have already observed that for a few moments, the brain can remain active even after the heart stops. Some people report awareness, memories, strange sensations. Science doesn't call this a soul, but it does acknowledge something even more frightening. We don't know everything about consciousness. This is where fear meets curiosity, because if the mind doesn't immediately shut down, and if consciousness continues, then perhaps death isn't the end we imagine. Perhaps it's just a change. Padre Pio taught that the soul doesn't disappear, doesn't get lost, and doesn't sleep. It awakens, and this awakening, according to him, reveals truths we ignore throughout our lives. If this is true, then our choices now matter more than we think. And if you're listening to this message, perhaps it's not by chance. Perhaps it's because the question you've always avoided finally needs an answer. Stay until the end. What comes next may change the way you see life and death. When we talk about death, many people think that science already has all the answers. But the truth is that not even scientists know how to explain everything that happens in the final moments of life. And that's where the curiosity begins. Doctors around the world have observed something surprising. In some cases, even after the heart stops, the brain still shows signs of activity for a few seconds, and sometimes even longer than expected. This sounds like something out of a movie, but it's real. Studies in hospitals have shown that the brain can remain switched on for a short period, as if trying to understand what is happening. Some people who have had near-death experiences have reported similar things. A feeling of being conscious, memories of their own life flashing by quickly, or the impression of observing everything from outside their body. Science doesn't say this is the soul leaving, but it cannot fully explain what this consciousness is. And here comes the most intriguing point. If everything were just the body, the brain should shut down immediately. But that's not always the case. Therefore, scientists admit something very important. Consciousness remains one of humanity's greatest mysteries. We know how the heart beats, how the blood circulates, but we don't know exactly where the feeling of "I exist" comes from. This mystery frightens many people. Others are curious, because if the mind doesn't disappear immediately, then perhaps death isn't a simple extinguishing of the light, but a transition. It's as if the body were a broken radio, but the signal is still on the air. Science observes the effects. Faith tries to explain the meaning, and it is precisely here that the question becomes impossible to ignore. If something is happening in these final moments, what comes next? Keep listening, because understanding what science has already discovered is the first step toward a much greater truth. Long before science began asking questions about what happens after death, faith already spoke about this clearly. According to Christian teachings, death is not the end of a person, but only the separation. Between body and soul, the body remains, but what makes us who we are continues. This idea may seem daunting at first glance, but it also brings a profound sense of meaning. Padre Pio always taught that the soul, it doesn't disappear, it doesn't get lost, and it doesn't sleep. After death, according to him, the soul awakens to a new reality, much clearer than life here on earth. It's like when someone wakes up from a confusing dream and finally manages to see everything clearly. This simple explanation helps even a child understand life doesn't end, it changes. Faith teaches that the soul carries with it consciousness, memories, and an understanding of what it did during life. Nothing is erased like a blackboard. On the contrary, everything becomes clearer. That is why religious people have always said that death is a moment of truth, not of immediate punishment, but of understanding. It is when a person realizes who they were, what they did, and what they failed to do. This teaching spans centuries and appears in different Christian traditions, not as a threat, but as a loving warning. Life has a purpose. Father Pio used to say that living well wasn't about fearing death, but about being at peace when it arrived. After all, if the soul remains conscious, our choices don't end with our last breath. And this is where curiosity grows. If faith has always affirmed that the soul continues to live on, and science today admits that consciousness is still a mystery, then perhaps these two views are not so far apart after all. Perhaps death is not a full stop, but a comma. And understanding this completely changes the way we see life. Here we arrive at one of the most intriguing questions of all. Does consciousness continue after death? For a long time, this was seen only as a matter of faith. But today, even science has begun to look at this mystery more closely. People who have had near-death experiences report something impressive, even when the body was. Still, the mind seemed awake. Some say they were reminded of their own lives, others felt peace, and some had the sensation of observing everything from the outside. Science attempts to explain these accounts as brain reactions in extreme situations, but there's a curious detail. Many of these accounts follow similar patterns, even among people from different cultures and beliefs. This leads researchers to admit something important. Consciousness is not as simple as we imagined. It doesn't work like a switch that suddenly turns off. The Christian faith has always taught something very similar. For it, consciousness does not depend solely on the body. When the body ceases to exist, the soul remains conscious. Padre Pio said that after death, a person begins to see their own life with total clarity, not like a confusing film, but as a truth that reveals itself. It is the moment when there are no more deceptions or excuses. Imagine explaining this to a child. It's like leaving a dark room and entering a bright place. Everything that was hidden becomes apparent. Everything that seemed small gains importance. This heightened awareness doesn't cause fear, it brings understanding. And here's where something fascinating happens. Science and faith don't clash, they converge. Science observes that consciousness can continue for a time. Faith affirms that it continues beyond time. They both agree on one essential point. Death does not erase who we are. If consciousness continues, then life doesn't end with the last heartbeat. It merely changes form. And this idea raises an impossible question to ignore. If you remained conscious after death, what would you like to see when that moment arrives? When we talk about what happens after death, Padre Pio always drew attention to one essential point, the responsibility of the soul for him. Death doesn't come as a senseless shock, nor as an immediate punishment. It comes as a moment of total clarity when a person begins to see their own life without masks, without excuses, and without deception. Father Pio taught that after death, the soul perfectly recognizes everything it has lived. Good deeds appear powerfully, missed opportunities too. It's not someone pointing a finger, it's one's own conscience speaking loudly. It's like when a child suddenly understands that they did something wrong. No one needs to explain, they simply know. This recognition doesn't stem from fear, but from truth. Interestingly, modern psychology observes something similar even in life. Studies show that the human mind seeks meaning, coherence, and reparation when it realizes that time is running out. People in extreme situations often reconsider choices, remember important moments, and reflect on the impact they have had on others. Faith says that this does not end with death, intensifies. Father Pio warned that the soul carries with it what it has built: love, repentance, gratitude, and also the consequences of its own decisions. Not as automatic punishment, but as a profound understanding. That is why he repeated that living well was not living in fear of the end, but living consciously of what comes after. This idea frightens some people, but sparks curiosity in others. Because if consciousness remains, then every gesture counts, every word counts, every choice matters. Death, according to Padre Pio, does not create truth. It only reveals what was already within us. And here's the question that grabs our attention. If today were your last day, what would your conscience take with it? Thinking about this isn't fear, it's wisdom. There's a detail that almost no one notices when talking about death. Time doesn't work the same way after her. Here on earth, everything is measured in seconds, minutes, and years. But according to spiritual teachings, this clock simply loses its meaning when the body ceases to exist. Padre Pio explained that in the spiritual world, an instant can seem much longer than we imagine. And this completely changes how the soul experiences that moment. To better understand, think of a dream. Sometimes it lasts only a few minutes, but within it, it feels like hours or even days have passed. Something similar happens after death. Faith teaches that the soul enters a dimension where time doesn't run in a straight line as it does here. There is no hurry, no delay. There is only awareness. Everything is experienced with total intensity. The most curious thing is that many people who have had near-death experiences report exactly that. They say that time seemed to stand still. Some claim they experienced many things in a few seconds. Others say they couldn't tell if it lasted a short or long time. Science listens to these accounts and admits the perception of time is directly linked to consciousness. And when consciousness changes, time changes along with it. Father Pio used simple explanations to talk about this. He said that after death, the soul is not bound by the human clock. Therefore, clarity comes all at once. There is no, "I'll think about it later." Everything presents itself at the same time. It's like opening a book and seeing all the pages at once. This idea evokes fear in some, but also curiosity. Because if time ceases to exist as we know it, then death is not an end racing against the clock. It is a transition to a state where nothing is rushed and nothing is forgotten. And this leads to a powerful question. If you could see your entire life all at once, without time hiding anything, what would you see? When discussing what happens after death, many popular ideas end up confusing more than helping. That's why Padre Pio always made a point of clarifying things. What does not happen after death? According to him, the soul does not enter a deep sleep, does not lose consciousness, and does not disappear into nothingness. These images are common in films and stories, but these are not part of serious spiritual teachings. Many people imagine death as a great blackout, as if someone turned off a light. Padre Pio taught exactly the opposite. For him, death is like turning on a very bright light. The soul begins to see clearly what was previously confused. There is no forgetting. There is no emptiness. There is perception. Even a child can understand this when they think that waking up is different from sleeping. Sleeping is dark. Waking up is seeing. Another common myth is the idea that a person becomes merely energy and loses who they are. Padre Pio rejected this. He said that the soul continues to be itself with identity, memory, and consciousness. The person does not merge with the universe nor cease to exist as an individual. They continue to be who they always were, only without the body. It's also not true that everything is automatically resolved. Death doesn't erase mistakes or transform bad choices into good ones. It doesn't change a person's history, it only reveals more clearly what was already there. It's like opening A closed box, what's inside doesn't change, it just becomes visible. These clarifications are important because they dispel exaggerated fear and false sense of security. Death is not a magical punishment, but neither is it an escape. It is an encounter with the truth. And understanding what doesn't happen after death helps us to better see what really matters while we are alive. Therefore, the final question remains, if nothing is erased and nothing is forgotten, how are you building your story? Today, everything that has been said so far leads to a very important point. This isn't just about what happens after death, it's about how we live now. Father Pio always taught that understanding the after completely changes the before. If conscience remains, if the truth is revealed, and if nothing is forgotten, then each day of our lives takes on a different weight. It's not fear, it's responsibility. Father Pio said that no one needs to wait for death to start living better. The small choices of everyday life already prepare the soul. A request for forgiveness, a kind word, a just attitude, all of this builds inner peace. Even a child understands when someone says, "Tidy your room today so you don't have to worry tomorrow." Life works in a similar way. The present organizes the future. Science also observes something similar, albeit with different words. Psychologists explain that people who live according to their values feel less guilt, less anxiety, and more serenity when thinking about the future. When life makes sense, fear diminishes. Faith calls this a clear conscience. Science calls it emotional balance. The result is the same. Padre Pio warned that we should not live obsessed with death, but attentive to life. He used to say that the biggest mistake is thinking there will always be time to fix everything. Death doesn't give warnings. That's why every choice matters. Every action leaves marks, and those marks don't disappear when the body stops. This teaching isn't meant to scare you, but to awaken you. Because if life goes on, then living well isn't optional, it's necessary. Not to please someone else, but to be at peace with yourself. And here's a simple but powerful question. If your conscience could speak now, would it be at peace with the life you are leading? Thinking about this isn't fear, it's wisdom. For a long time, many people believed that science and faith were enemies, as if one were trying to destroy the other. But when we talk about death, something surprising happens. The two begin to get closer. Father Pio was never afraid of science. On the contrary, he believed that all truth, when it is true, does not conflict. It completes itself. Science asks questions like, what happens to the brain? How does consciousness work? Why do so many people report similar near-death experiences? And with humility, the scientists admit something important. Consciousness is not yet fully explained. We know how to measure the body, but we don't know how to measure the self. This is not a failure of science. It is an acknowledgement of its current limitations. Faith, in turn, answers another question. What's the point of all this? She doesn't use devices or exams, but centuries of reflection, prayer, and spiritual experience. Faith teaches that life has a purpose, that consciousness doesn't arise from nothing, and that death is not a mistake, but a passage. Padre Pio said that science observes the signs, while faith understands the path. Even a child can understand it this way. Imagine two friends looking at the same sky. One counts the stars, the other asks why they exist. They are both right, just looking at them in different ways. Science explains the how. Faith explains the why. When we talk about death, this connection becomes clear. Science sees patterns, accounts, and mysteries. Faith offers meaning, direction, and hope. Neither needs to negate the other. Together, they show that death is more profound than it seems. And that brings great relief, because if even science admits that there is still much to discover, perhaps faith is not speaking of fantasy, but of a truth that we have not yet been able to measure. The final question remains in the heart. What if science and faith are pointing to the same mystery just by different paths? we have arrived at the most important moment of this entire message. After hearing what science observes, what faith teaches, and what Padre Pio explained with such firmness, one question remains that cannot be avoided. How does all this change your life now? Because understanding what happens after death isn't just curiosity, it's a calling. If consciousness persists, if truth is revealed, and if nothing is simply erased, then life cannot be lived haphazardly. Padre Pio said that each person receives signs along the way, thoughts that persist, questions that return, anxieties that don't disappear. None of this is by chance. They are invitations to awaken while there is still time. Even a child understands this when they learn that choices have consequences. If you plant something bad, you reap something bad. If you plant something good, you reap something good. Life follows the same logic. The difference is that, according to faith, this harvest doesn't end with death. It continues at a deeper level where there are no more excuses or distractions. This idea may cause fear, but it can also bring peace, because if we are still alive, we can still choose. We can still change. We can still ask for forgiveness, correct mistakes, do good, and live more consciously. Death is not a shock to those who are awake. It is merely a passage. Padre Pio used to say that the greatest regret is not making a mistake, but don't love while there's still time. And that sentence sums it all up. If you're listening to this message now, maybe it's because something inside you has already understood that life is more than rushing around, collecting things, or spending your days on autopilot. So the final question remains simple yet powerful. If today were your last day, would you be at peace with the life you've lived so far? Think about it calmly. This reflection might not only change the ending, it could change the whole journey.
Hear the true prophetic message.